Ever feel like elections need like a cheat sheet, especially when it comes to foreign policy?
Yeah.
Feels like we're wading through treaties and trade wars, and I just want someone to tell me what it all means.
Right.
So that's what we're doing today. We're diving into Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's foreign policy stances
Okay.
to see what a difference a president makes on the global stage.
That makes sense.
And to guide our deep dive,
Right.
we're using this Council on Foreign Relations report. It just came out on October 9th.
Okay. Very recent.
It breaks down 10 key foreign policy areas that they say are really important for this election.
Gotcha.
So we'll go through these 10 points, compare where Harris and Trump agree and disagree,
Uh-huh.
and hopefully figure out what it all means for, well, all of us.
I like it. Sounds like a plan.
So let's jump right into it, starting with where Harris and Trump differ most dramatically.
Okay, I'll lay it on me.
Well, one of those areas is climate change.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Harris has called climate change an existential threat, and she's supported Biden's return to the Paris Agreement, pushed for investments in clean energy.
Huge contrast with Trump on that one.
Totally. He's still questioning the science on climate change, really sees fossil fuels as the way forward.
It's a completely different worldview.
It's not just about whether America tackles climate change, it's how.
I see what you mean.
Are we talking about new pipelines or rejoining international agreements? Those have massively different implications, right?
Absolutely. And that difference in worldview goes even further, like with China.
Oh, yeah, that's another one where the news just seems to get more tense every day.
For sure. It's one of the most consequential relationships in the world right now, and their approaches couldn't be more different.
So how do they see this relationship actually playing out?
Well, Harris emphasizes holding China accountable, particularly on human rights, which has been a huge point of contention.
Yeah.
But she also knows we need to cooperate on global challenges.
Right.
It's about finding that balance, acknowledging the competition, but working together when we have to, like on pandemics or nuclear weapons.
Which are obviously hugely important.
Absolutely.
And that's something I imagine Trump might approach a little differently.
Yeah, could you say that again?
Well, Trump, just thinking back to his presidency's America First approach,
You're right.
it feels like he might be a bit more confrontational, especially with things like trade and tariffs.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. Remember those trade wars and tariffs?
Yeah.
Yeah, big focus on U.S. manufacturing, even if it meant shaking things up globally.
And that's a lot for the global economy to deal with.
It is.
But even before we get to the economy, we have the war in Ukraine,
Right.
which really puts these foreign policy positions into perspective.
It does, and the contrast between Harris and Trump is stark.
How so?
Harris has been completely unwavering in her support for Ukraine,
Okay.
echoing that as long as it takes, commitment we keep hearing.
Right. And that's more than just words. We're talking billions of dollars.
Exactly, billions in military and humanitarian aid.
And Trump. I know he hasn't been president for a few years,
Right.
but he's still been making headlines with his statements about Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. And it points to a much more hesitant approach to U.S. involvement.
You think so?
Well, he's been reluctant to commit to more aid for Ukraine.
Hmm.
And while he did put sanctions on Russia when he was president, we have to remember his relationship with Putin.
It's true. He always seemed warmer towards Putin.
Right. And you can't talk about Trump and Ukraine without thinking about that first impeachment.
Totally. That was directly tied to Ukraine.
It's all connected.
Wow.
These different approaches to Russia and Ukraine aren't just about one conflict.
I see what you mean.
It shows fundamentally different views on what America's role should be as a global power.
How we deal with allies and enemies.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder how those approaches would play out in other potential conflicts, too.
Yeah,
It's like global chess with much higher stakes.
that's a good way to put it.
Speaking of high stakes, what about AI and technology?
Oh, that's a whole other board game.
It's moving so fast.
It really is. And it's not even just about the tech itself.
It's about what it means for war, for global power, all of it.
It is. We've heard Trump frame it as this arms race with China, like a tech Cold War.
Which makes sense given how focused he is on competition with China.
Right.
But what does an arms race even look like with AI? I mean, are we talking quantum computing, hypersonic missiles, something crazy?
All of the above. Honestly, those aren't just buzzwords. They have huge implications.
Exactly. These could reshape the world as we know it.
They really could.
So where does that leave Harris on the AI front?
Her focus, based on what she said in her past work, is more on responsible development of AI.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
Things like governance and ethics, which we haven't really seen much of before.
So it's about striking that balance.
Exactly.
We need innovation, but we also need to make sure we don't create something we can't control.
That's the hope.
But tech isn't all about weapons and competition. What about global health,
Right.
especially pandemic prevention after COVID? That feels like it has to be a priority.
It's true. Even if it's not making headlines every day, the lessons learned from COVID are here to stay.
Yeah, and that's where their views on healthcare in general really come into play.
Exactly. How do we prevent the next pandemic? How do we handle global health crises?
And Harris has been pretty vocal about her focus on healthcare.
She has both domestically and internationally.
And it's interesting that she ties it to reproductive rights,
Right.
because that goes way beyond just your typical healthcare policy stuff.
It gets into complicated territory fast.
And Trump's approach to healthcare has been, let's just say, unpredictable.
Yeah.
I mean, his administration's response to the pandemic was all over the place. We had the economic stimulus, which was huge, and Operation Warp Speed to get a vaccine out there.
Right.
But then he also pulled out of the World Health Organization.
And don't forget the restrictions on abortion-related aid.
It was a lot.
It really was.
And speaking of, let's talk trade,
Always a hot topic.
especially in an election year. And this one's no different. And it seems like when it comes to trade, Harris has really drawn some lines in the sand.
Yeah, she's been clear about wanting worker protections in any trade deal.
And environmental standards, too.
Right. It's a package deal.
So no cutting corners on labor or climate to get a deal done.
Exactly.
Which is pretty different from what we saw during the Trump administration.
Yeah, it is. Trump's view was that global trade was basically rigged against the U.S.
He always talked about that.
And he was laser focused on bringing back manufacturing jobs.
Even if it meant kind of going it alone.
Even if it meant going it alone, imposing tariffs, renegotiating everything.
And that America First message really seemed to resonate.
It really did.
So looking back at these 10 areas from the Council on Foreign Relations report,
Yeah.
it seems like we're looking at two very different visions for how America interacts with the world.
Without a doubt, it's about how we engage with allies and competitors and even how we face global challenges.
So it's not just about the next 4 years.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about what kind of world we all want to live in.
It really is.
One of cooperation.
Yeah.
Or one where everyone's just looking out for themselves.
And what role America plays in all of it.
Exactly. Are we leading the charge or are we doing our own thing?
It's a big question.
It feels like a huge turning point.
Yeah, it does.
What do you think is the biggest issue, the one that could really swing things one way or the other?
Oh, that's tough.
Mm.
There are so many. But if I had to pick just one,
Yeah.
I'd have to go with climate change.
It's huge.
It's the ultimate global challenge, and they have completely different approaches.
It's not even just an environmental issue anymore, is it?
No way.
It's tied to the economy, to security, to migration, everything.
It's everything, and the decisions we make in the next 4 years, those will have consequences for decades.
No pressure. So I guess this deep dive, this comparison of Harris and Trump, it's more important than ever.
It is. We have to understand the stakes, the consequences of these different worldviews.
It's about realizing that this election, it's not just about America.
No, it's not.
It's about America's place in the world,
What kind of leadership we project or don't?
and that impacts everyone.
Absolutely.
So much to think about. We just scratched the surface here today, but hopefully it's a good starting point for everyone listening.
Definitely.
If you want to learn more, make sure to check out the full Council on Foreign Relations report.
It's got even more details on these issues and what they could mean for the future.
Because in a world that's this interconnected, foreign policy isn't just foreign policy anymore, is it?
Not at all.
It's personal. Well said. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.